Now, one of the most redoubtable Labour members of Parliament, sadly standing down at the next election, is Alan Simpson. He's the MP for Nottingham South, where, of course, in which city, of course, took place some remarkable events in the week. Alan, thanks for joining us. Alan, are you there? Alas, we don't have him yet, but we'll get him in a minute. Let me just summarise what happened in the week. Environmental and civil liberty groups have questioned the circumstances surrounding the mass arrest this week of a group of school students who were allegedly preparing to cause prolonged disruption to the nearby Ratcliffe-on-Soar coal-fired power station. In what is thought to be the largest single preemptive raid on a group of demonstrators in British history, police used more than 200 officers from 5 forces to arrest 114 men and women at the privately owned Iona School in Sneinton, Nottinghamshire. They've been charged with conspiracy to commit aggravated trespass and criminal damage. All those arrested were released on bail pending further inquiries. The school's owners said they had no idea protesters were meeting there. No environmental group has yet claimed responsibility for any planned protest. Nottinghamshire police have defended the raid, saying they believe the protesters intended to engage in an unlawful demonstration that risked shutting down the power plant. Officers said they found bolt cutters and locking equipment and suspect that the activists were planning to chain themselves to vital equipment inside the power plant. But there has been criticism of the police for using SAS-style tactics during the operation to arrest activists before they'd even begun protesting. Alan Simpson, MP, said it had serious repercussions for the right to free assembly and had utilised overly heavy-handed tactics being very much in the news when the police and demonstrations are discussed. We do have Alan Simpson on the line now. Alan, thanks for joining us.
Good evening, George.
Now, it was in your manor that all this happened. What particularly concerned you about it?
Well, I think the first thing was the scale of the operation. When you talk to local people, their gut feeling was that this had to have been an operation to break up a major international terrorist network or an international crime network. And when it all came out what the scale of the raids were about, people were a bit puzzled, really. A couple of hundred police officers, a cavalcade of police vans and dogs to get people who were planning to take some sort of direct action around the Ratcliffe-on-Soar power station. So what began as presumptions that it had something to do with Al-Qaeda looks, at the end of the day, more like that it was associated with Al-IKEA, a sort of self-assembly group of environmental protesters. So the sheer scale of the operation was somewhat perverse. The chair of the police authority in Nottinghamshire said he was astonished that they'd managed to find 200 police officers on a bank holiday when
yes,
he couldn't
indeed.
find
for
one.
5 forces, no less.
Absolutely.
Any idea how much all that cost, Alan? I'm sure you'll be trying to find out if you don't know yet.
I don't, but what I do know is that the protesters had met in outbuildings attached to the school, but when the raid took place, there was quite substantial damage done to the school itself.
By the police?
Yes, by the police. So we now have a situation where the scale and cost of the damage done to the school may have considerably exceeded the scale and damage to the power station. So, a school that's in Nottingham has probably got one of the sort of greatest commitments to living more lightly on the planet, gets saddled with a bill for damages in order for the police to have protected a power station that is responsible for climate change damage. So there is a sort of perversity about that as a process.
Don't you think we're watching our country changing in front of our eyes, Alan? I never imagined, growing up as a child, that the day would come that the police would be killing people on tube trains and killing people on demonstrations and arresting protesters before they've even protested, using the notorious and absolutely intangible notion of conspiracy and so on. We really have gone a long way down this road now, haven't we?
We have, and this is a point that you and I were making in the run-up to the Iraq War, that we argued at the time that what began as a war over there would end up as a war over here. We would begin to see ourselves as the enemy. And this fear, either of the terrorist threat or as what are now seen as environmental protesters are seen as environmental terrorists in some circles, that we start to live in fear of ourselves. We close down society in a way that Al-Qaeda could only wish it could have done to us. And worst of all, if you look at the legislation that has been used, you now have the criminalization of non-criminal offences, because the most worrying part of this whole process for me is that the police have got into the habit of imposing pre-charge bail conditions. Now, they used to, under the Criminal Justice Act of 2002, they used to be able to put in post-charge bail conditions that stopped you going particular places, meeting with each other in the course of the investigation. But this has been extended under the 2006 Police and Justice Act to allow the police to impose quite extensive bail conditions before you've even been charged. And they can do this during the period in which they are investigating the question about whether you had committed an offence or were likely to have committed an offence. And there's no time limit on this. So in this case, all of the would-be protesters have been banned from going anywhere near a power station for the whole period that the police are looking at whether to charge them or not. So you have, in effect, you have a criminal conviction, you have a charge, a penalty, based on the absence of a trial and the absence even of an offence.